24221783. Thank you. Right, good afternoon and welcome to the side event, Ensuring the Santiago Network is Fit for Purpose. If a few of you at the back or at the side would like to come a bit closer to the front, you're more than welcome. So I'm Colin McQuistan and I'm the Head of Climate and Resilience at Practical Action, and we're co-hosting this event with IIED, and I'm really pleased to say that we have a panel of speakers. About an hour ago, I was really worried that we wouldn't have a panel of speakers, so it's really good that we have our guests from the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee here on the panel today. And we've got hopefully a discussion rather than a presentation. We're not going to be using any slides. We're going to be running through what the Santiago Network is, where we are in the negotiations so far, and what do we need to do looking ahead to COP27 to achieve the operationalization of the Santiago Network. So I'll introduce each of the speakers as we come to them. And to kick off the session today is Heidi White, who is with CAN International, who's going to give us an overview of the Santiago Network.
And where did it come from? For those who aren't aware of the history, the Santiago Network was established at COP25 in Madrid. It was established in the context of the review of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, or the WIM, as you might often hear it referred to. This is the body that's established under the convention to address loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. And to help developing countries deal with these impacts. So in establishing the Santiago Network, countries had a vision of a body that would have the capacity to implement the functions of the WIM. This was in circumstances where the Executive Committee, or EXCOM, which is considered by many as the policy arm of the WIM, had been ill-equipped to do so. And this was also where developing countries were in desperate need of a mechanism under the convention to access support to address loss and damage as the adverse impacts of climate change intensify. And I'm sure many of us have heard over the last fortnight about the IPCC report and how the limits of adaptation are being reached, and how we really need to focus on finding solutions to support developing countries to address these impacts. And the Santiago Network was also particularly important in a technical way because the WIM has three functions. That's enhancing knowledge and understanding, increasing coordination and coherence among stakeholders working on loss and damage, and also enhancing action and support, including finance, technology, and capacity building. And this third function for many developing countries, they felt that that function wasn't being dealt with by the WIM yet, and that the Santiago Network might fill this gap. So the Santiago Network was established specifically to catalyse the technical assistance of organisations, bodies, networks and experts. And there's another acronym you might hear, OBNEs, for the implementation of approaches that would help people on the ground in countries and communities most vulnerable to loss and damage. And this was to be through local, grassroots, subnational, national level initiatives. It would operate at the regional level, and it would connect all of the streams from the local up to the global and back down again. The organisations, bodies, networks and experts tasked with providing technical assistance were also mandated to report on their activities to the Executive Committee, which would include information about these activities in its annual reports. So beyond the establishment in Madrid, there wasn't an agreement on how the Santiago Network would become operational, and there was divergence over the course of the year and the few years, and that divergence, I think, continues in many ways around whether the Santiago Network would merely be a website which would match developing countries with technical assistance providers, or something on the other end of the spectrum, more like the Climate Technology Centre and Network, an established mechanism for technical assistance under the technology mechanism of the Convention. And the CTCN, another acronym, has a comprehensive system, including an advisory board, a coordinating body, national liaison points to facilitate the provision of technical assistance. And hopefully some of you have heard of that model as well. So fast forward to Glasgow, there was an agreement on the functions of the Santiago Network, which included, among other things, to assist developing countries to identify their needs and access technical assistance, including this matchmaking function of helping developing countries find a suitable expert to provide them the technical assistance that they need to address loss and damage. And also to help them access finance, capacity building and technology. There was also agreed a process to develop institutional arrangements of the Santiago Network, operational modalities, so how will those functions be carried out in practice, and also funding. How will this body be funded? Funding was divided into the administration and operations, and also money for the actual technical assistance. And this process included, we had submissions, which hopefully some of our speakers will speak to. Many countries made submissions about how they see these institutional arrangements playing out and what the Santiago Network looks like. And we also had submissions from NGOs, from UN bodies. There was quite a range of people who provided inputs. There was also a technical workshop in Copenhagen earlier this year. And of course the session here at SB 56. So where are we now? As Colin said, we weren't really sure if this would come together, because parties are still negotiating what they see the institutional arrangements to be. They're discussing the structure of the network. So what are the different parts? I think there's convergence around the need for a coordinating body that's perhaps hosted by a UN institution or other body, and there'll be a process to select that host. There's also a discussion happening about the roles and responsibilities of the different parts of the network, and I think there's because the parties haven't quite agreed on the structure, they're having difficulties discussing those roles and responsibilities and where they fit. There's also a conversation about the terms of reference for a host for the Santiago Network. And I think that the parties will, I mean, it's difficult because those discussions are still ongoing, but parties are moving forward. So I'll close by just noting, going back to the Climate Technology Centre and Network, because a lot of parties have been looking at the decisions to set up the CTCN, lessons learned from how it's implemented its work, and how countries have received technical assistance, whether the technical assistance that parties have received under the CTCN has actually helped them and created transformational change in their communities. And parties are concerned to ensure that if we do set up a Santiago network to address loss and damage, how is that actually going to translate into helping communities on the ground? So a few lessons learned from the CTCN are the need for capacity building at the national level. The Santiago network will only be as strong as the link with the national level and the capacity of governments to engage. The second point is the need for sustainable and predictable finance. The CTCN has a voluntary funding mechanism, and a lot of the work of the director is fundraising. So that obviously creates difficulty with implementation. And then the third is the need to develop a process to understand the needs and barriers that countries face. This is critical to enabling demand-driven assistance to be provided and avoid a situation where you have organisations coming already with ideas of the types of assistance that countries need, and the prioritisation of addressing needs in countries gets a bit waylaid, and the key issues aren't being addressed. So I'll stop there and hand back over to Colin.
Thank you very much, Heidi. So that's a quick overview of the Santiago Network. And now what we're hoping to do is have a bit more of an open discussion. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists a couple of questions. They will respond to them, and then ideally I would like the audience to join in with your own questions. So we're going to start off with Stella. Stella is the European Union Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee member. And the two questions that I'd like to ask Stella is, first of all, what does she see as the essential elements for the Santiago Network? So in terms of the form and the functions, the roles and responsibilities, what are the essential elements that the Santiago Network needs to contain? And then, as the representative for the European Union, what does she think the European Union can contribute to make sure that the Santiago Network is successful? So, Stella, if you'd like to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you so much, Heidi, also for the introduction. And I think, it was very good to also have the background on the Santiago Network history, and you also recalled the context, which is the IPCC report, especially the Working Group 2 report that we have received not so long ago, and that was really very present throughout the discussions here in Bonn in different sessions. So that kind of points to the urgency of starting the process of, or enhancing the process of catalyzing the technical assistance to the developing countries most vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. For the EU perspective, can you hear me? Because Hafish is bringing this closer. So from our perspective, from the EU, we have been consistently holding the position that the Santiago Network needs to be operationalized as soon as possible. Because we really think, the experience and the activities of the different OBNEs, as Heidi has explained, so the different organizations, bodies, and networks that are active in this area can really bring good responses and help countries avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. So I think in Glasgow we had really good progress. We agreed on the functions. We were willing to also negotiate form at that point, but we respected the fact that we needed to first have the functions and make further progress here. So you asked what we can contribute from the EU side. At the COP26, the EU, several EU countries, following the agreement of the functions of the Santiago Network, already pledged some money to be directed to the Santiago Network as a signal of the political will and of the kind of our expectation that this will be operationalized as quick as possible, so we can channel this money and already have this help people on the ground and start delivering the technical assistance. So you were referring to the submissions and to the different elements that we think are important for the operationalization of the Santiago Network. So we have, as the EU, we have also made, of course, our submission, where we included some of the key operational modalities for the Santiago Network. We think it really, one of the key modalities for the network is that it engages a broad range of actors, and that these are, of course, actors that have the knowledge and the expertise from the area of different effects of climate change and impacts, but also that this expertise comes from the organizations that are active in other areas outside of the UNFCCC regime, such as the humanitarian organizations, development, disaster risk reduction, and many others, and that also those organizations come from different levels. So they are regional, international, national, but also local organizations. It is, of course, key not only for us, but also for many others, and I think it's the area of convergence that the technical assistance needs to be demand-driven and results-oriented. From our perspective, one of the kind of operational modalities that we wanted to emphasize was that the technical assistance is directed to developing countries particularly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. This is something that we were and we are still highlighting in the discussions. And another element was that we felt it has to have a light structure, so be flexible and agile, and we didn't want to create a heavy bureaucracy, because for us it's key that the technical assistance actually flows to the countries and to the communities that need it, and isn't the money that is directed to the Santiago Network is not spent on running a big machinery of a big secretariat or a big structure with different functions. So for that, we were arguing for the structure to be quite lean, but of course robust enough to be able to fulfill the functions that were agreed in Glasgow for the Santiago Network. We also saw the role of the EXCOM to be important in the Santiago Network, because the Santiago Network is created under the WIM, we saw a lot of complementarity between the work that is being carried out by the EXCOM and the EXCOM different expert groups that have a lot of this expertise from OB&Es within themselves. So we wanted to make sure that there are synergies that are explored and the connections that are made. And we also, as part of the submission, we talked about the role of contact points as national contact points for loss and damage, to have this role of sharing information and bringing the information about what the Santiago Network can do closer to the different stakeholders on the ground. I don't know if you would like me to stop at this point, or maybe come back with some other points later, because you had other questions, but I'm happy to.
That's perfect.
We have more of a conversation.
That was 5 minutes. That was perfect. So the second panelist is Hafish Khan. Hafish is the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee member for Bangladesh. And for Hafish, the question really is, what's his expectations from the Santiago Network as a developing country that is highly climate vulnerable? What are his expectations from the Santiago Network? So over to you, Hafish.
Thank you, colleague. Hello, colleagues. So I'm working at the community level for last 18 years. So I'm very happy to introduce myself as a community lawyer. So let me share some of my experience from the community, what we demand, what we need. But before that, I would like to appreciate Stella. She said about the demand-driven, and also we would like to appreciate developed country parties, because we do see their urgency. We do appreciate that approach. And EU already placed for 25 million euros for the Santiago Network. So it's really huge for us. So, in Bangladesh in 2009, there was a super cyclone, that is Ayla, hit in 2009. Soon after these, we visited that area. We found that due to storm surge and salinity intrusion, all the croplands lose their ecosystems. So that was a huge damage to ecosystem. As a result, the farmers, they forced to change their livelihood. Why? Because all these croplands was converted into shrimp farming. So automatically those farmers was forced to change their livelihoods. And some of the farmers also left that coastal zone to some other nearby cities, including the capital. So what I want to say, you see, the damage to ecosystem is so serious issue that resulting to change your traditional livelihood, that resulting you to leave the your homesteads. So now question is how to restore that ecosystem. It is the point we need some technical assistance to restore the ecosystem. You know, to restore the ecosystem is so critical. We need technical assistance. Also, we need associated finance and capacity support, because you need to ensure the community participation with whole process to restore the ecosystem. I would like to inform you that when I went there again 2014, after 5 years, we found that little trees are there. So naturally to restore the ecosystems, it takes 7-8 years. Now challenge, we would like to provide technical assistance in the coastal zone of Bangladesh. Now how? That's why we are now thinking of the Santiago Network. So if we look at the process, it is beautiful strategic approach. In Madrid, we established this network, which would be catalyzing the technical assistance. Then in Glasgow, we only agreed the functions. We agreed for 6 key functions within the broader function of the Warsaw International Mechanism. Now we got the mandate to SB's work further. Now we are working here. Here we are trying to structure an institution. So to structure the institution, we heard Stella that that is the institution should not be bureaucratic, easy, agile, but we also would like to avoid the bureaucracy. But we would like to structure an integrated, coordinated institutions. So in terms of structuring an institution, I think there is a need for an independent secretariat that can coordinate and facilitate in collaboration with the relevant organizations with expertise that can provide technical assistances, for example, the coastal communities in Bangladesh. But to provide this technical assistance, you also need to think about financial mechanisms. I'm not telling out the entities, make it too clear. Financial mechanisms, because you need to mobilize finance capacity to ensure to access those technical assistance. So an independent secretariat can coordinate and identify the right organizations, right expertise, right technologies for the right vulnerable communities. Then who will be oversight this secretariat, and who will be hosting this secretariat, and how? Again, I do agree with Stella that must be the country demand-driven. So how it would be demand-driven? That demand needs to come from the vulnerable communities, vulnerable states like Bangladesh, and how you can ensure the institution to act with the party-driven process. So to ensure the party-driven process, that must be within the UNFCCC processes. That's why vulnerable countries are thinking to establish an advisory body that would be guided by UNFCCC processes to ensure the party-drivenness. So these are the two broader approach developed country parties would like to ensure. That is, that must be party driven process, and that must be a need-based approach. So with these two approach, we developed country parties are trying to structure the institution. So let me stop here. Thank you. I'm very excited to see some of our ExCom colleagues, also loss and damage communities are here. So I'll be happy to respond to any of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hafish. And then our final speaker is Sierra, and Sierra is the US Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee member. And again, in the case of a developed country, it's really more about what can the US contribute to make sure that the Santiago Network is successful. So, Sierra, you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and hopefully I won't use all of that time because I'm eager to hear from all of you and engage in a discussion. And I also just want to say thank you, Hafish, for bringing us down to that local level, because I think it is helpful to ground some of the work of the Santiago Network in that context. And I think it is an interesting example to think about a cyclone and the different types of technical assistance that may be needed in such a circumstance. I know we've talked about Bangladesh as an example of having good early warning systems, but that may not be the case for all countries. And so you could see there may be technical assistance needed in establishing early warning systems, in developing preparedness at the local level, in terms of responding after event to, as Hafish mentioned, the damage done to ecosystems and restoring those ecosystems. Hafish also mentioned displacement, and there may be a need to help a community prepare to host displaced people or house displaced people. And so there's many different types of activities that are relevant to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. And to respond to those different activities and provide the technical assistance, there's many different types of organizations and institutions that are best served to respond. And that can be a challenging landscape to navigate. And so I think the Santiago Network is envisioned to help navigate that landscape, to help make the connections between the communities on the ground that are needing that assistance and the organizations that are best placed to respond. And so when we have thought about the Santiago Network, it's been really key to think about a network that's able to bring in those very diverse organizations, and also to think about ways to make sure that countries and communities and the different seekers of technical assistance are able to access the network and to be connected with appropriate organizations that are able to provide technical assistance. And some of those organizations already have relevant programs, have relevant support that we hope we can maximize by making those connections. But we also have heard that there's also a need for support for those technical assistance activities. And so we do envision the Santiago Network also providing some support for OB&Es to respond to these requests. And I think it was helpful that Heidi mentioned some of the lessons from CTCN. And I think one place that the CTCN has been quite effective has been actually engaging organizations and institutions within countries and building the capacities within countries, engaging local organizations to respond to the requests that they're receiving. And I hope that's a type of model and form of engagement the Santiago Network can also replicate to help build that capacity within countries. I think we've also heard some about the need to be demand-driven, and I think we fully agree that the Santiago Network should be responding to the requests that it receives and be able to respond accordingly. And I think the challenge is trying to figure out how to make a structure and a secretariat that's able to work across these very diverse fields and make those connections so that countries are able to respond. I think another key element that we see is that given the diversity of these types of needs is that we don't see a secretariat able to respond to all of them or even necessarily to have the expertise within house to respond. And so we have seen a more flexible, agile secretariat that's able to work with those seeking technical assistance to refine their proposals, to better develop those proposals, and in doing so, identify their specific needs, and then is able to communicate those. So maybe I'll end there and engage in discussion, but I do also just want to say before concluding that I think it has been very constructive conversations. I think when you look back at the submissions and see what countries came to this week with, there was a lot of differences in views, but over the last week, I think there's been a lot of willingness to engage. There's been a lot of constructive discussion around some of the roles and responsibilities, as we've been calling them, because that is where we've been able to find good agreement around what are the things that we actually want to be getting out of this network. And I think there's a lot of commonalities there. And so I think we are actually making slow but sure progress. And I'm really excited to have a meaningful outcome at COP27 where we're able to decide on some of the institutional arrangements and continuing the process to fully operationalize the Santiago Network.
Thank you very much, Sierra. So now it's the interesting part, because now it's up to the audience to sort of steer the discussion. So we've got now plenty of time for a question and answer session. I think our three panelists are very brave, because we have no idea of what the questions are that you're going to be asking. But I think the other thing it's really important to stress is that all three of these Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee members are relatively new to the process. And we do have a few people in the audience who've been members of the XCOM in the past, who probably also have considerably more experience than our panelists. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions. So hands up, please. Anybody got a question for our panel? If there's no questions from the audience at the moment, okay, we've got a couple of hands coming up.
HOD, we can go.
Okay, great. We've got 3 hands. So, Harjeet, you were first.
I can go. Is it okay to sit, stand? Okay, I can sit and ask. Thank you very much. My name is Harjeet Singh, and I'm from CAN, International Climate Action Network. So it was really good to hear our vision and how we want Santiago Network to be structured. I would like to zoom out a little bit, and what I hear, I'm not following it line by line, so it would be good to hear from you. My understanding is that on one group is having a vision that Santiago Network provides a lot more active technical support. Which would mean that the structure or the secretariat will require a sizable number of people to support that technical assistance to be provided. The other vision I see with a very light secretariat, but role is primarily of matchmaking and not providing active support. So that's my sense of two ways of looking at it. And my personal perspective is that the way or where we are at this moment, as Hafiz was saying, the need is huge. We delayed this process for a very long time, and I think we need to acknowledge that. This was supposed to happen 2014 onwards. Nothing happened on action and support, be it Santiago Network, be it the finance facility that we are discussing now. And how we are going to make sure that we support southern institutions to provide that capacity. So if we talk about a very light touch structure, very naturally what would happen in terms of matchmaking, that the northern institutions, which have more capacity, more technical know-how, will be the ideal match to provide capacity support. And then all the resources are going to flow back to northern institutions. And there's not going to be any systemic effort to strengthen the capacity of institutions in the global south, because that's what you need. That's where the impacts are happening. And you would like those institutions to be strong enough to respond immediately than wait for the northern institutions. So when we talk about a very light touch structure and only matchmaking, that, to me, that's a major issue from a very long-term perspective. And yes, we need to respond urgently, but we need to also respond in a much more systemic manner, thinking whether we are shifting capacity to the global south and building their capacity. And also the capacity exists, so how do we enable the south-south capacity sharing? My second point is about the advisory body. Developing countries are demanding an advisory body that can guide the Santiago Network. But I hear most developed countries having a vision where just a UN body that takes care of it hosts the Santiago Network without any guidance from a body that should be purely looking into technical and not just depending on XCOM, which we know is a different structure. In the way we look at organogram, Santiago Network sits next to the XCOM and not reports to the XCOM. So they need to work in tandem, but not looking for guidance from XCOM all the time. So that's how the demand for an advisory body. So yeah, I mean, I would like to come back to that point. When the need is huge, we need to work much more on boosting capacity in the global south, how we are going to move forward in the absence of an advisory committee, and a very light touch structure that will not respond to the whole issue in a more systemic manner. Thank you. Sorry for taking a bit longer to explain.
Yeah. Hello, I am Nusrat Naushin. I'm working at the International Center for Climate Change and Development based in Bangladesh. So my question is basically based on the deployment of the technical assistance, that since it's a network, so I mean, the focal points of each country, isn't it a better mechanism to, catalyze the notion of national mechanism so that the deployment of technical assistance or the need-based gaps that should be identified so that you can deploy the technical assistance, it comes through a national mechanism. So maybe, catalyzing the work on developing national mechanism of each of the country, maybe a good way to kick off the Santiago Network so that you can provide the technical assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. As the first question was quite long, I think we'll probably let the panelists answer those two questions. So we've got the question about the differing perspectives and how they're playing out in the negotiations. We've got the question around how to facilitate that global south capacity building, how to make sure that we're building through the Santiago Network real capacity in the communities and the countries where we need to. The difference around how the Santiago Network is governed, the advisory body vis-a-vis the role of the UN body and the role of the executive committee. And then this excellent question around local deployment and how do we build through loss and damage focal points or other mechanisms. So would anybody like to go first, rather than me putting people on the spot?
I'm happy to start, but then very happy to hear the comments from my my XCOM fellow members up here. So I think there's a good question about the south-south capacity, and I think I respectively disagree that a large secretariat would be better able to serve that role. I mean, I guess it depends on ultimately who hosts the secretariat and where it's based. But, I think the CTCN has some actual lessons learned on this space in terms of managing to recruit small and medium-sized enterprises as part of the network in many countries. And I think that's been an effective model to engage and build capacity in country. And I also know they have some guidelines about even when it is a larger organization that is providing technical assistance around contracting and engaging local capacity. And I think that also is something that is valuable to consider as, this network gets built out so that the technical assistance is coming from organizations that are based in communities. I also, though, want to caution that we aren't going to negotiate every single detail of a network and then ask someone to take it over and run it for us. I think ultimately will have to provide some of these principles and some of these guidelines and entrust, the secretariat and the host and, some entity that is providing advice to implement and figure out what are the best ways of operationalizing some of those principles, whether it's through guidelines or the way they build the network, et cetera. Otherwise, we really would never leave these negotiations. I think also, there is some disagreement around the advisory functions, and we're still in a lot of discussion. But I think there's common understanding that there are important advisory roles in terms of providing the oversight, the party oversight of the Secretariat. I think you also mentioned bringing in technical expertise into the process, and I think that's also something really important and something we should be thinking about how to ensure that's fed in to the functioning of the Santiago Network. But we are engaging deeply in discussions around that, and I think there is some common understanding around advisory roles, but not yet exactly who will be serving that role. And then on the national mechanisms, I think we have envisioned a more open network where anyone would be able to request assistance, recognizing that it is often local organizations that have needs in this space. I think that countries are also able to request support. And there's no reason they can't do that to develop their own capacity. So I'll end it there and happy to hear from others as well.
Thank you so much for your questions. I think Harjit, you highlighted the point of urgency and also the importance of the capacity building in the South. I think for us, this point of urgency is really key, and that's why we hoped we would not spend a lot of time setting out all the elements of a very complicated structure where you spend perhaps a long time discussing this and then having something that is very heavy and very bureaucratic and not necessarily really responding quickly to the needs. So we also saw, I think, perhaps the possibility of having more of an iterative process, maybe, setting up some of those, basic structures, having a robust process that would help us identify the host or the convening coordinating body, describing some of those principles, operating modalities, and starting the work, rather than spending time really elaborating a very, very complex structure. And it doesn't have, we don't see it as something that is only matchmaking. Sierra, I think, spoke to the kind of the enormous landscape of different organizations and activities that cover different areas. I think it's also important to, have more of the conversations and reduce the fragmentation and really enhance the cooperation and understanding also from the countries and communities that will be demanding the technical assistance, for them to really know, where they can go and who would be the person or the organization or the network that they can even, think about when they are preparing their requests. But we didn't see the Secretariat as competing with those organizations. The Secretariat is not, for us, the body that is implementing technical assistance. It's supposed to fulfill help fulfill the functions of the Santiago Network, but not be one of the OBNEs. Yes, in terms of the advisory body, we are still in the discussions, as Sierra was explaining, and there is, convergence around some kind of advisory roles and responsibilities. But I think we have different views on who should be performing those different parts of the advisory roles, and we do see that ExCom can play a role there because it is composed of members that do represent the parties. So we do see a link there. And on the point, the question from Bangladesh, I think we also would like to leave this to the countries to decide how they will run the process. There is an issue with the contact points right now. There's not so many of the contact points that are nominated, and very often they are perhaps one person. So we definitely would like to avoid the situation where the contact point is a bottleneck, and then there is some kind of a limitation for the different communities in the countries to be able to put together a request for technical assistance, because that would be this one access point. So hopefully that answers a little bit the question. Thank you.
So we heard Sierra and Stella, so I would not be long. So you see, it's not a negotiation room, so we are relaxed. But you see, Harjit and colleagues, we are very much on the same page. Sierra also, Stella recognized the necessity of advisory roles and responsibilities. And they also agreed that there should be a secretariat. Now, in terms of structure, those unhoused, those secretariat and advisory body. So, colleagues, let us recall the establishment of Warsaw International Mechanism back in 2013. Christina was US negotiator, Angela was from EU. We spent many nights in Warsaw, and we tried to establish a mechanism with a broader expedition. So initially we agreed for the EXCOM, we got the EXCOM. Now EXCOM we do consider as a policy arm. You see EXCOM and its expert groups are working last 7 years now. So still we are trying to enhance the understanding, even ourselves, also relevant stakeholders. And EXCOM implemented its 5-year rolling work plan, and now is going to update its 5 years rolling work plan. So we are all from EXCOM, so we do understand EXCOM is really busy. And secondly, we wanted to establish this network as an implementation arm. For example, you see, I gave the example, loss of lives, loss of livelihoods, damage to ecosystem, and I talked about the displacement, loss of traditional livelihood, and some non-economic loss and damage like values, culture, territory. So it's very critical. So as an implementation arm of the Santiago Network, I do agree with Stella that we need to avoid as much as possible to the bureaucracy. But at the same time, we need to ensure that the Santiago Network deliver its functions effectively, efficiently, so that our vulnerable communities get support immediately. So it's not so easy to structure those institutions. And what I said, I would like to reiterate that it must be party-driven. And that's why I think an independent, under the guidance from UNFCCC, COPS, CMA, there must be an advisory body. That advisory body can oversight the secretariat, and secretariat must be an independent institution, so it can coordinate and identify right institutions. One of my colleagues from Bangladesh talked about the national mechanism. That's very important, but it must be supported from the UNFCCC processes. We need to build up the capacities, national institutions, even communities. Without community participation, you cannot introduce any of the technologies. If it is the case, it would cause another damage to the ecosystems, because community knows the right system, right ecosystem. So we need to ensure the community participation. So it's a huge task. So considering this, we develop country parties who are facing the vulnerabilities at our home. We are trying to structure this institution with a strategic approach. We do again appreciate your urgency, but we realize our urgency, but we would like to go step-by-step process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that first round of questions. Obviously, there's a huge sense of urgency, but I'm not hearing, I don't know how successful we're going to be with the informal today, and whether we're going to get to the point that we need to be to actually have something that starts delivering. So I guess I'd like to sort of stress the point that we need to be thinking more about the urgency, and whether we just have something that is a body or something that can actually start to deliver. So we've got a second round of questions, and I've already got one question.
So just a clarification, I didn't say, I didn't mean to say that you need a big structure or small structure. There is nothing called big and small structure. You know, for some big is small, for some small is big, depending on what our mission is, what we want to achieve. And this is why I was asking this question, what do we really want to achieve? If we say matchmaking, you can do it with a handful of people. But if you want to provide active support, then structure has to be thought through. The key word is optimal, right? What's that optimal structure that is required to implement the vision of the Santiago Network? So that's the point I wanted to clarify. In terms of urgency, I'm sorry, I'm going to be very direct. I don't think developed countries should talk about this word urgency, because we have been talking about urgency for the last several decades, and the whole work on action and support was blocked by developed countries. And now you cannot use the same word against us and say, now there is an urgency, so we will just go with whatever we have, and we'll create something very light touch, and let's just run with it because there's an urgency. I don't think that is justified. That's not a right moral argument. I'm sorry, I'm being very direct because I have been watching and being part of XCOM for a very long time. And on CTCN, the question is, are we saying it is able to meet the needs, or is it able to do something that we are mentioning? The point I'm trying to make is there a review which says that CTCN is able to provide some support commensurate to the need? Now, that's very important. CTCN is doing something, there are lessons learned, that's one part of it. But the point is, CTCN is supposed to provide technological support to developing countries to move to renewables. But if you look at the share of renewables in the world right now, and role of CTCN, are we satisfied? This is a global body. We are sitting in a global space. Are we satisfied with what we have achieved in the field of renewable energy? And that's what CTCN was supposed to do. Not what it is able to do, we should be asking the question what it is supposed to do. And the same question I'm asking for Santiago Network.
Thank you. Do you want to ask a question?
Good afternoon. My name is Tetet Lauron. I come from the Philippines, and I'm also here as part of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and the Women and Gender constituency. So I'm so happy that Hafish already, sort of painted the landscape about the situation of climate vulnerable communities. And I also want to add on a little bit more to that, because where I come from, when we hear technical assistance, it's so vague for us. And we've had so many experiences where technical assistance that was supposed to benefit, communities on the ground, etc., they actually just go back to the donors. Highly paid consultants, machineries, etc., etc. So I'm still trying to imagine in myself what the Santiago Network could really deliver in terms of technical assistance. But then we also say it's supposed to be the implementation arm of the WIM, which is supposed to, provide action and support. So I'm still struggling with that disconnect based on our concrete experience, where technical assistance is a north-south flow, when in fact, our communities, for the longest time, have been striving, to keep their heads above water with the use of local resources, with the use of, genuine people-to-people solidarity. So are these things being considered in the design of the Santiago Network so that it is indeed fit for purpose, which is for supporting communities already struggling to keep their heads above water? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Good reminder of the purpose of the talk, which is the Santiago Network fit for purpose, which I think both questions relate to. One is around is the design and the establishment of the Santiago Network about what it needs to do rather than what it can do. So how do we get it to be the type of organisation that it needs to be to tackle the problem that it's facing? And this question around how can it ensure that work on the ground is effective? How can we make that technical assistance different to the current paradigm, which is top-down, fly in, fly out? How can we actually build that capacity in the Global South so that these communities are better able to respond themselves and then get the additional assistance that they need? So those two questions to the panel. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your very good questions. Maybe I'll respond to the last question to, I think Tetek was your first name, if I got it correctly. You ask what technical assistance would be. I think that's where, this demand-driven and a kind of tailored to the needs aspect come into play. I think it's something that Santiago Network, the way we see it, would really be, learning from what is needed on the ground and making sure that the technical assistance that is provided actually responds to what the different communities on the ground at the different levels or the countries present as technical assistance. And there can be many examples, of course, of what this could be. And I really hope that, perhaps, this will not replicate some of the bad experiences that you have been describing. So that's definitely something we would want to obviously avoid. One of the things that we have been thinking about also, having perhaps, and we have put in our submission from the EU some criteria for, what the technical assistance could be going into. And one of the ideas was that it would be good if some of this technical assistance had also this leverage effect, so that it would be like a first step for a country to, for instance, perform some kind of a mapping or, do some groundwork for, this country or the community, then to be able to build on that and perhaps look for bigger sums of money to finance a project that actually, contributes to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. So the question about, what is the kind of how do you build a structure that is fit for this purpose? I think it's also, something that might be difficult to answer at the very start. I think it's also the way we see it is that we obviously need a robust structure, so that will help to fulfill those functions, but also something that is able then to build on the lessons learned and to improve as it grows. And as it grows, that means also, involving more organizations, more experts, having this learning process, knowledge sharing, capacity building. So there's a lot of things that we also see, once this network actually starts operating, that we will be able to improve it over time as well. But for that, we need to start operating, and that's something that we are still discussing. And that's what I was referring to when I was talking about the urgency to actually start and make some progress at this still now and later this year. Thank you.
Thanks for those questions. I think there's a few things that I'm thinking of. So first, you asked, what is the technical assistance in this space? And the Secretariat, the UNFCCC Secretariat, actually conducted a survey, I think 2 years ago now, of parties saying, what type of technical assistance do you want? And so if you haven't seen that, it may be helpful to go back and look at that and see what their responses were. Many of them were related to disaster risk reduction and early warning. And I think that is one reason that some of the submissions we've received from non-party actors, they've been engaged in the process. But I think the other question you asked about how do we make this effective is really, I think the network piece of this is really important. Because I think that there needs to be more coordination, that there needs to be more consistency in the types of engagement. And I think that the network is really important in catalyzing those types of understandings to understand, how the different organizations involved may work better together. to provide a resource for countries to go to or local actors to go to get support for technical assistance and helping make sense of that diverse landscape. And I think there is a lot of different types of technical assistance in this space. And I mentioned a few in my earlier response. I think there could be a need for conducting vulnerability assessments or risk assessments. There's possibilities for planning, for developing programs or project ideas or those sorts of activities for capacity building. And I think the AOSIS submission actually lays out a relatively good list in my mind of some of the types of activities that could be in this space. So I'll leave it there. And I forget what the first question was, actually. Sorry. What was it?
Is the Santiago Network, are we designing a Santiago Network
needs.
around what we can deliver rather than what we need to deliver?
Yeah, I think the Santiago Network's power is in that coordination of the different actors and trying to move towards a better understanding of the needs and working together to address those. I do not think that the intent is for the Santiago Network in itself to be able to fully address all loss and damage needs. I think that's an unrealistic expectation for a Santiago Network, but I think it can help catalyze the actions that we need in a broader ecosystem of actors and organizations to start making steps in that direction. But this one organization, I think, quite frankly, no, it will not address the full scope of all needs related to this issue. Is there any single organization? I think that is an unrealistic expectation.
So I'll be very brief. It's not a negotiation room again. But you see, it's our vulnerabilities, it's our needs, it's our urgency. So let us structure the institution with our freedom, our understanding, our experience. So with that said, hope is a side event. And I was so excited to sit with two of my ex-com colleagues. Please let us structure our institution. Hope you would be kind enough to accommodate our ideas, because our ideas are coming from the facing vulnerabilities at the community level. Very much looking forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hafish. We've got time for one or two more questions. So are there any more questions from the audience? Hands up. No. Okay. So
I think Hafij's point was actually also very well made. I think we're in this process right now. Give us great ideas about how to make sure an institution is designed, that it is responsive to local communities, that it is not just a fly-in, fly-out model. I think, we're open to ideas. We're engaging in conversations right now. And so I've never built an institution before. I think we're all consulting experts. We're all having lots of discussions about how to make this useful. So I welcome thoughts.
any questions from the audience? If not, Haji.
We'll go back. If not questions, we'll go back.
I tried. There was nobody, so I thought I'll take the space.
There was someone, I think there was someone in the back too. Yeah.
Okay. In the meantime, I'll finish my point. I do want to emphasize on the point you made on the catalytical role, and at the same time using the power of a network. I come from a network. I'm from Climate Action Network, and I've been with other networks as well in their boards. And that's true. If a network functions, then it can have create that kind of ripple effect. But the words that you have used, we really need to make sure that we put enough resources behind to make that network meaningful, resource that network in a manner. And I'll again bring back the point with what is our vision. If our vision is just to create a network where, again, institutions from the global north are going to rule, it's not just, it doesn't make good economic sense, or probably it makes for those institutions, but from responding to climate crisis perspective, where we know that solutions come from ground, and we need to make sure that these are accessible, which clearly means that we have to strengthen institutions at the very, very local level, local, sub-regional, national. That should be our ultimate objective of setting up this network. And not every time the connection goes to London's, UK's, and Amsterdam's of the world. That's the biggest concern. And if we don't put enough resources, this is going to happen by default. So we are not saying that one body will take care of everything, but because it's a network, it has that power, provided we are very clear about that catalytical role and put money behind it, and with the objective of strengthening the capacity in the global south.
Thank you. So I'd like to just ask our panelists to have 1 or 2 minutes, just your final thoughts to the audience, and then Heidi's going to provide a wrap-up based upon what she's heard, and we'll probably be finishing a bit early. So who would like to go first on the panel? Should we go in the reverse order? Maybe Sierra, you go first.
So, Sierra first, yeah.
I feel like I've been talking a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think first, thanks so much for engaging with the Santiago Network. I think sometimes I have conversations with people, they're like, what? What are you talking about? And I think as we're talking about, I hope this can be a really powerful network by making some of those connections and coordinating actors. And, I hope that doesn't just fall on the network itself, but also on all of our collective efforts and bringing organizations, to the table and telling them, yes, this is a place to engage and to work together. And so I think that's an important message. And I think also, again, I think it's important to recognize that we are going to be building this out, and we are going to be learning by doing in some cases, and hopefully we can all continue to have these discussions and approach it with that kind of common goals that we have in a way that we can evolve the network to develop something that's meaningful and can actually fulfill the functions that we have decided on. So I will leave it there and pass it on.
So I'll be very brief again. So I do appreciate IIED and practical action. It was really interesting to engage negotiators with civil society and academics. It's a great opportunity to hear some of your thoughts, some of your concerns. So with that said, hopefully in developing country parties would come up very soon, Sierra and Stella, some ideas. So very much looking forward to engage with you in the negotiation room. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, from my side, of course, it's great to have those conversations and to hear also the suggestions and ideas, and also the kind of the perceptions from colleagues who are not in the rooms but are actually on the ground. So the people who are trying to design a structure to respond to the needs of. So I think it's really important to have those exchanges. And I think even if we are still in the process, you can see that there's already some effects of those conversations. I think there's more actors from different communities of practice that started to take interest and started to take part in those conversations, which we have seen here in Bonn, also in the context of the Glasgow dialogue. And I think that's already something that is building up, and we can, Santiago Network can also definitely build on that and continue that process. And of course, as we are all part of the WIM EXCOM, there's a lot of expertise also among the expert groups and the organizations that are there. So, maybe an encouragement also to you to kind of see what's happening and how you can connect with these different types of expertise and how can this be useful for the work that you're doing on the ground. And yes, as we said, we probably will have a long evening this evening and hope to make some progress. And yeah, thank you very much again from my side as well.
Thank you very much. And Heidi, over to you.
Okay, so hopefully this isn't too long-winded because I've been percolating while everyone's been speaking. Thanks for the inputs from our audience, and thank you also to Sierra, Hafish and Stella. It's been really interesting to hear your thoughts and hear the discussion. I guess I'd like to pick up on Tadet's passionate intervention, and I really appreciate that coming from the civil society perspective, because I think to many of you perhaps, and to many people outside of these rooms, it seems like we're talking about, like Sierra said, what's the Santiago Network? What are you talking about? Why have you spent however long we've been here talking about an advisory body or the roles and responsibilities, and why is that different? And I think, picking up on your point, Harjeet, we've been talking about loss and damage for a long time now. The Vanuatu, on behalf of AOSIS, raised the need for finance to address loss and damage 30 years ago when the convention was being negotiated. Why are we now at a point where we're discussing an implementation body? Meanwhile, CAN and other actors are outside saying, well, we don't even have finance to address these needs. So why would we be establishing an implementation arm of the Warsaw International Mechanism if there's no new and additional funding for loss and damage to actually finance any of this? And I guess the question, where my mind went when you were speaking to Ted is, how can the Santiago Network transform the system that we have, where we have, not enough capacity being built in the global south, and a lot of the capacity stays in the global north? If the Santiago Network doesn't address this problem, then why are we here negotiating it, I guess? And the other thing to consider is the broader global context where the whole system is struggling. It's not just loss and damage, it's the whole global system isn't quite working for developing countries at the moment, and they're struggling on a number of fronts. And the Santiago Network can't solve all of these problems, unfortunately. I hope it does. But it can try, and like Sierra said, we really need input. The negotiators need help from outside to really figure out how they can build something that actually helps people on the ground in communities. And when we talk about technical assistance, what is that? I mean, some of the discussions I've had with people is, the Santiago Network will go in and identify that, the cyclone has destroyed your house and you need a house, and they might develop a plan and an architectural plan for how to build the house again. But the Santiago Network isn't going to build the house, and so we need to be clear of where the work of the Santiago Network ends. And where, we need national mechanisms to be built to be able to address these issues themselves. And I think that's one of the really big lessons from the Climate Technology Centre and Network, is that the Santiago Network will only be as strong as its link with the national level. And a lot of countries really don't have the capacity to deal with loss and damage and engage with these processes. A lot of them are still trying to understand what is loss and damage, and I'm still trying to understand what loss and damage is. I think we all are. And I guess I'll try and wrap up. So I guess in terms of the way forward, I guess, the critical thing is to make sure that this thing is properly resourced, that communities are hearing about it and understanding how the negotiations are progressing, and we need to find some way to translate the technical so that, it's been really good, Hafish, to hear your bringing us back down to the ground level. Okay, what exactly are we trying to do here? And I'm really looking forward to ongoing engagement and ensuring the Santiago Network is fit for purpose.
Thank you very much, Heidi. So, thank you everybody for joining this session today. Climate change is obviously the biggest problem. We need to change, and we need new ways of working. And those new ways of working need to be built on international collaboration. And I think that's one of the essences of what's going on right now here in these conference halls, is we recognise we've got this massive problem, and we recognise that if we work together, we're going to have more chance of solving these problems. And I think the Santiago Network is a good parallel to what that looks like, hopefully. But as I was hoping for this session, we'd be talking more about, well, what will that look like? Because we will actually have got a negotiated text. What we've demonstrated is we don't have that international collaboration. We're not getting a consensus, and my colleagues sitting next to me are going to spend another evening, probably until the early hours of the morning, going back through those areas of commonality, but also those areas where they have not yet got any consensus. So, my commiserations for a long evening ahead. I think the other important thing is, and it is recognised by all of the speakers, is that we need to get the Santiago Network operationalised as quickly as possible, but we must not rush, because we know that if we get it wrong, it's not going to materialise that international collaboration. It's not going to work most effectively. And with the limited resources, we know it's not going to have the resources it needs to deliver in every case of loss and damage. It needs to be making really, really smart decisions and doing the right thing. And therefore, it needs to be well designed, and it needs to be accountable. It needs to be under the UNFCCC. It needs to be party-led. It needs to be driven by the needs on the ground. But also, one of the things that we have learned from the international negotiations is that the party-led process can actually be a bottleneck. So how can the Santiago Network be party-driven, but get around the bottleneck of having to go through focal points at national level to do implementation on the ground? And then, of course, the other big challenge, and this is why it's difficult, is we need a mechanism that works as effectively for the rapid onset events, the ones that get the high profile in the news, the cyclones, as well as the slow onset events, those more pervasive changes, sea level rise, desertification, where over very, very long time frames you end up with the impacts being manifest. So how can the Santiago Network be designed in such a way that it responds to that diversity? And then finally, I think the scale of the problem. We know that by 2030, with the current trajectory in terms of global warming, we're only at 1.1 degrees of warming at the moment, maybe higher than that. We're trying to keep it below 1.5. We're talking about between 280 and 500 plus $billion per year in losses and damages. The IPCC Working Group 2 report was clear. Losses and damages are escalating. We know the impacts are going to be huge. So the Santiago Network is vitally important to start responding to that losses and damages. And then finally, IIED, the organisation that co-hosts this event, did a really interesting economic study of Cyclone Amphan in Bangladesh, which struck the country last year. I'm trying to remember the numbers, and I can't remember them specifically, but it was over $1 billion of impact that cyclone caused, of which approximately half was covered by the government of Bangladesh in relief and in assistance funds. A small proportion of that was from the international community. But the people who were paying the price for the climate emergency were the people who were impacted by Cyclone Amphan. Half of the costs were borne by those people on the front lines of the climate emergency. And that's why we need the Santiago Network. We need the Santiago Network designed in a way that is going to provide those people with the assistance that they need. So with that, I'd like to end, and I'd like to go big thank you to our panel. Give them lots of energy for tonight. And thank you for coming today. And any questions, please follow up. We've got time. Thank you.
want a Santiago network. What? I said it sounds like you don't want a Santiago network.
What do I want?
I don't know what you want. In your closing remarks, it sounded like you were not